Hello. Good morning to those who have joined us. My name is Janae Cooley, and I am the Associate Director for Strategic Engagement at the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. As many of those who are joining us know, we are the newest Department of War regional center focused on the Arctic. And as probably many of you are tracking, our center provides an international venue for bilateral and multilateral research and education involving U.S. and allied military and defense practitioners, utilizing our unique academic fora to build strong, sustainable, and strategic international networks of defense and security leaders. A keystone of this collaborative approach is the TSC's National and Arctic Interest Chairs Program. Our national chairs hail from U.S. allies and partners abroad, representing the Arctic nations. Our Arctic Interest Chairs bring functional expertise from international law, industry, scientific research, and the military. And the chairs contribute their insights to all TSC mission areas: education, research, analysis, and strategic engagement. And their affiliation with the TSC enriches their work in their home institutions and countries. We are grateful for our Arctic chairs, and we have 3 of them with us today. The venue that we are convening today is to discuss what it takes to actually fuel, fly, and fight in the Arctic. Deterrence in the circumpolar north depends on credible warfighting capabilities, but shooting down a missile or launching a fighter jet takes energy, materials, and know-how. This preview of our 2026 Anchorage Security and Defense Dialogue brings together defense infrastructure, space, and innovation experts to explain how supply and kill chains converge in our Arctic. Today, I am joined by 3 of our esteemed Arctic chairs to discuss this topic, whom I will briefly introduce. First, TSC Arctic Chair for Space and CEO of the Alaska Aerospace Corporation, Mr. John Oberst. Next, we have the TSC Arctic Chair for Infrastructure and Engineering and Senior Technical Advisor for the Directorate of Logistics and Engineering at NORAD in U.S. Northern Command, Dr. Jeff Fogg. And last but not least, our TSC Arctic Chair for Defense Innovation and Managing Director of the Defense Innovation Unit On-Ramp Hub in Minnesota, Mr. Matt Hickey. We are bringing these 3 folks together today to talk through this complex problem set. And what I'd like to do is start off our discussion by allowing each of our esteemed Arctic chairs to introduce themselves. Could you please give our audience a quick background on your organizations and your work, especially for those of you who are not explicitly Arctic focused? How does your work connect to the Arctic mission set? I'd like to start first with Mr. Oberst.
Thanks, Janae. I'm John Oberst. As Janae mentioned, I'm leading the Aerospace Corporation for the state of Alaska. I'm a 30-year Air Force retiree, and just to give you a little background on myself to kind of shape why I'm here. I did a stint in the military with ballistic missile warning. Also have a background in AWACS, air refueling, staff, and air defense, and those do tie in a geographical sense to space as well. And then prior to the military, I worked with Orbital Sciences developing a 4-stage vertical vehicle called Taurus, and that kind of led me into this job because of the industry experience and the military experience to lead Alaska Aerospace. The governor and the board appointed me about 2 years ago, and Alaska Aerospace was known to me, but it wasn't as impactful to me until I learned the details of it. We've been around for 35 years. We're a state corporation. We're established in the statutes. We operate the Pacific Spaceport Complex in Kodiak, Alaska, and that's one of 4 vertical orbital spaceports that the nation uses to access space. We're a commercial spaceport, so out of those 4, we're the only one that is not on a federal installation. We do science missions, government missions, commercial missions, focusing on polar and sun-synchronous orbits, and then also suborbital launch out over the Pacific with one of the widest azimuths for launch on the planet. We've been doing this out of Kodiak since 1998. We have 35 launches to date, and that's serendipitous with 35 years of continuous business. That's a brief overview of me and Alaska Aerospace.
Thanks, John. I will never now forget 35 years and 35 launches. That's fantastic. If I could move now, please, to our esteemed colleague, Dr. Jeff Fogg, who's joining us from U.S. Northern Command. Over to you, sir, to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sinead. I really appreciate it. I'm Jeff Fogg. I work at U.S. Northcom in the Logistics and Engineering Directorate. Here I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for the Directorate. I also lead the Logistics and Intelligence Fusion Cell, which is really how do we better understand what's ongoing across North America to enable global force projection and homeland defense. So because we really are concerned about how we move forces from here to our forward combatant commands if we're executing in that environment. In addition to that, I spent a great deal of time working Arctic interest areas with a research portfolio that spans a broad spectrum and really getting after what we've done research-wise, binning that, and then how do we do directed research in the Arctic and really get after those capabilities that we need for the warfighters in the high north, because you just can't show up and make things happen. You've got to be prepared for it. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space going forward. So I've been at this. I retired from Northcom in 2010. Came back here 10 years later as a civilian, and so I've had a great run here. I really do appreciate the command and what we do and what we bring to the fight. And it's often thought of as that here in North America we're kind of in the sanctuary zone, and it couldn't be further from the truth. If you're keeping track of what's happening in the news lately with all the industrial control system cybersecurity attacks that have been ongoing from our friends in Iran. So I advise you to kind of keep focused on those areas too. But very interested in helping out today and in providing my insights in the high north. So thanks so much today.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I was just noting what I think could be a tagline for a bumper sticker on every truck that I see driving the Glen Highway up here. You can't just show up in Alaska and make things happen. It takes some planning. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. And I look forward to hearing your comments on that. Last but not least, I'd like to turn it to our Arctic Chair for Defense Innovation and the Managing Director of the Defense Innovation Unit in the On-Ramp Hub in Minnesota, Mr. Matt Hickey, a great friend of the center. Could you please introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, thanks, Janae, and it's good to be back on the airwaves here with our Stevens Center friends. As you mentioned, I'm Matt Hickey. I'm calling in from St. Paul, Minnesota today. We're on the daily. I run the Defense Innovation On-Ramp Hub Minnesota Defense Innovation Unit presence here in the Upper Midwest, and I'll get to some of that in a second. My experience in relevance to the Arctic dates back a number of years when I was pushed out of a C-130 aircraft above Geronimo Drop Zone up there in the Elmendorf Air Force Base, joint J-Bear area as a young lieutenant with a platoon of paratroopers behind me, wheeling me out the door into blustery winter conditions. And ever since that time, I've had a strong affiliation with Arctic security, Arctic strategy, Arctic warfare, and appreciation for the work that goes into it from top to bottom. And when I say top to bottom, I guess what I mean is every element of sort of the way we look at things from a strategic perspective, the political, the strategic, the operational, the tactical, and that every element of it matters, from the federal government all the way on down to local governments, tribes, native corporations, so our partners and allies across the Arctic and beyond in order to get the job done. As many might know, I after a stint in the military, I eventually made my way back to Alaska, where I served at the Stevens Center during its early years, and in so doing, I started to realize that there was often a need to take very innovative approaches to the way that problems are solved in the Arctic, and that has never been more true than what I see now in my capacity interfacing with the Defense Innovation Unit, industry, and Department of War needs. And when I say that, and this is likely not new to many folks, but just to highlight the need, as many people know that the Arctic is oftentimes the shortest route between a point A and a point B, which can be good if you're traveling. It can be bad if you're trying to deter and defend from threats, especially threats that move at hypersonic speeds or are undetectable, as John and Jeff know all about. And that requires robust industry capacity and in RDT&E efforts, research, development, testing, and evaluation. That is to ensure the technologies we deploy, we put in the hands of warfighters, can actually get the job done. And that's exactly what the Defense Innovation Unit seeks to do. And that's what I'm doing here in Minnesota and in the upper Midwest, is trying to connect industry, whether they be low readiness, technology readiness levels, or high technology readiness level companies, basically early stage or late stage products in terms of their development, and ensuring that they can get into the hands of the warfighter where they need them and when they need them with the right technology. And the Arctic is a place that, as many people know who are tuning in, it's a place where all these strategic considerations converge. National interests, strategic interests, technological interests, but also where a lot of the challenges come together. So looking forward to contributing to the conversation on any and all of that. It's just so good to be back here with some friends talking about this good stuff. Thanks, Janae.
Thank you so much, Matt. And it's great to have all three of you on. In fact, one of the things I admire most about DIU is this vertical that you have where you can move up and down from strategic to operational, to tactical, and back up again, all in one day or maybe in one conversation. We'll find out this morning. But that's awesome with regards to that creative approach at the beginning and at the later stages in the innovative things that you're working on. So thank you so much for being with us. We're looking forward to the conversation. And I thought what I might do just to start this conversation off, hearing the variety of backgrounds that you bring on the call this morning, if I could ask all of you, the question for all three, understanding this kind of wide coalition of stakeholders that you represent, what partnership between your three worlds does not exist today, but should?
Did you want to start with me, Janae?
Please, thank you.
It's a great question. We've identified partnerships, I think, in many different venues. For example, and we need to mature them. For example, I have a partnership in the Alaska statutes, with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute to develop space in Alaska to help it reach its full potential. We've signed an MOU with them, with the UAF GI last summer, revalidating those purposes, which haven't been pursued since the inception of Alaska Aerospace 35 years ago. And it's bearing fruit. So I think that developing the partnerships right now is going to be the focus of our resources. I think we've identified a lot of them. The Ted Stevens Center is new to me, and I was fortunate to be invited to be a space chair, but it's also a fantastic collaborative venue to bring these other institutions together and continuously pretty much collaborate. But it's like whack-a-mole. You got to keep doing it until the message gets through, and there's never enough time and enough venues to do it. So the Ted Stevens Center is significant in developing stakeholder collaboration. And then as an aerospace corporation, a commercial aerospace corporation, I was invited to be an initial signatory to an international commercial spaceport collaboration group. We signed an MOU in Milan, Italy, us, the United States, 2 spaceports, us and Virginia Space, and 4 spaceports from other nations, which are predominantly Arctic. We have Sweden involved, we have Norway involved, and we have Scotland involved with spaceports. And the idea behind that is to get ahead of commercial space, to be able to collaborate there to develop policy and standardization as we move forward in this growth industry, which is it's the most significant growth in space in human history. So these stakeholders that I'm involved with in the commercial spaceport collaboration are the same players in Ted Stevens. So it's just another way to get the message across on what's important and what do we need to focus our resources on. So I think, just to take it back to the beginning, we need to develop what we've identified. I think that's where the focus needs to be.
Thank you. And I'll take that with me, develop what we've identified. And I also sympathize with the whack-a-mole sometimes, getting the message out over and over and over again. I like that word picture. I'd like to take the opportunity to pass the mic, if I could, to Dr. Fogg or Mr. Hickey, if they'd like to comment on the question or the comments of Mr. Oberts. Over.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in here with a couple things. I think that, my experience, in working in the Arctic security domain, it's oftentimes, the first word that we would put into a search engine, mentally, metaphorically, or literally is, Arctic something. And oftentimes the connection is, how do I connect an Arctic thing to an Arctic thing? Or how do I immediately look at through that lens, an Arctic lens? And I kind of actually challenge that assumption and say that, it doesn't have to be an Arctic thing to be relevant to the Arctic. And I can get specific with this, but I guess what I'm trying to say is remove the geography qualifier from the qualification here and overlay a technical function, a technical area or a functional area, and say, how does that apply to my region, or how might my region apply to that particular thing? And so, if the one thing is king in the world right now, it's data. Whoever has the most data seems to be winning. You can be doing something with the data. So long as you can compute the data fast enough, you have more information. If you have better information, you can usually make better decisions and achieve some sort of strategic victory, whether that's in business or in nation state actions. And I think the Arctic has a large role to play in this data game, whether it's the downloading of the data because of its proximity to space relative to other locations, whether it's the strength of the nations that comprise the Arctic geography in the coalition, say, of 7 Arctic countries that are all in an alliance together, leveraging the unique geography of those 7 in order to be proximately closer to space in order to download the data, or the location that the data would inevitably exist. Where is the sovereign territory that the data is downloaded, and what might we be able to do with that when other nations are asking Arctic nations to be the repository of the location in which the data exists? That's just one. If we look at it through the angle of threats, we have already, put out there the fact that oftentimes the Arctic, an avenue of approach across the poles, notably the northern pole, is the shortest distance between, say, China, a point of origin in China, a point of origin in Russia, and a point of termination in the North American continent. But it's some technology that's going to be deployed. What is that technology? Well, it's going to probably be some sort of warhead attached to a hypersonic missile that's trying to be developed. As John knows, hypersonics can be tested in real time up in Alaska, or presumably launched from the spaceport there, shot across the Aleutians, and we can figure that out. But a lot of development goes into getting to that point. Companies need the ability to scale, size, prototype, and test hypersonics before they get to a location where they actually test it. I mean, 35 launches have been done 35 years, which is an incredible accomplishment for the spaceports up there. But that means a lot of work goes into one launch. And as John knows, or has maybe even seen firsthand, sometimes those launches don't go well because it's hard to get things into space, and it's hard to get things to go really fast. Well, what's being developed here in Minnesota is a hypersonic test facility. It's a Department of War funded private-public partnership between the Department of War, some companies, and some universities and research entities that are going to try to figure out how to do hypersonics better. So that's a tangible connection I see between a company here in, say, the lower 48 or a location with another location outside of the Arctic or in the Arctic that could collaboratively work together to achieve the effects that we'd like to see in the Arctic security space. So those are a couple ideas in which I would like to see evolve over the next 5 years or so. I'm sure Jeff has some things to contribute as well.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thinking about circling back to your main point at the beginning there, he who has the data or they who have the data win. I want to say thank you for being part of this conversation as we continue not only to discuss, but also spread the data and build the connections across our different spheres so that we can share that data with each other. So I would like to, with that, turn it over to Dr. Fogg, if I may, if he'd like to have comments on this introductory question or what the other speakers have said. Over.
Yeah, so the area that I would like to grow partnerships in is really infrastructure and logistics, because I see incredible capability throughout Alaska as far as the natural resources that are there, and what it can offer the country and the Department of War, and for our military industrial base, what it can provide for us. There's a challenge. The challenge there is getting those resources out or bringing resources in. So it's what infrastructure supports that, and how do we optimize that? How do we enhance it such that the distribution can occur, and not only for bringing things in, but also for taking things out, because it's a two-way street there. And I think that having a greater Department of War understanding is exceptional, but also having a business environment that grows that capability, because we recognize that we're not the only demand signal in town, and that demand still needs to grow for industry, and the industry in the lower 48 needs to understand what Alaska offers it, and open up that business opportunity for the lower 48 and with those investments in infrastructure and logistics. So that's my partnership growth area there is logistics and infrastructure to the betterment of the private sector, but also to the betterment of the Department of War, because if one wins, we both win in that environment. So thank you very much today.
Dr. Fogg, thank you very much for that. And it was just a perfect tie-in to the next question, which I'd like to open up to all three of you. But Dr. Fogg, I'd like to start with you if I could, because I think it just builds so nicely on your comments with regards to the possibility for benefiting dual use infrastructure and logistics up here in the Arctic. In your view, Doctor, what breaks first in the Arctic? Equipment, supply chains, or assumptions?
Boy, all three. I don't think there's a it really is seasonally dependent. I think that if you're up in there in the summertime, it's great. Everything's going to go probably like you hoped, very similar to the lower 48, maybe some restricted capability as far as access and limitations for supply chains. But it's okay. You're not fighting Mother Nature nearly as much. In the wintertime, it's going to be a different game. So I think that if I were looking at the whole thing, it's seasonal as far as which goes first. I think that the assumptions, though, if it's a cold weather environment, that's what's going to break first. And just a sort of quick answer there. Over.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up, if I could, Matt, if you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. Well, if I'm answering directly with the categories provided, I'm going to say that assumptions break first. And I think that we have some historical evidence that supports that. Oftentimes things don't transpire in the manner in which we think. We looked at decisions that have been made by the governments of the nations that govern the countries of the Arctic. Be careful not to say that govern the Arctic, because that's not necessarily a thing. But we probably didn't predict a large-scale war by the Russians in Ukraine. We maybe not would have predicted the fact that Finland and Sweden would have thus joined the alliance, and then maybe some of the other actions that have transpired since then that have either strengthened or strained a particular alliance. We made a number of assumptions that may have indicated otherwise, but I think maybe more so relevant to the technologies that are going to be relevant in the Arctic. I think what's maybe to test my own hypothesis here, let me try to make an assumption. And my assumption is that here I am maybe being contradictory to myself, but my assumption is that humans aren't going to be able to achieve the job that we want to have done in the Arctic. and that we need to develop autonomous systems that get this job done for all the reasons that Jeff just kind of mentioned. If indeed you have good conditions, environmental conditions, in the best of times, say that being during the summer, you hope that things will go well. But more often than not, they won't. The terrain is too large, the conditions are too variable, the problems and the challenges just too vast. So how do we deploy the right systems that embody the norms and values that we exude as a nation state into a region that is not going to be represented by humans? I think that's the challenge that we face when we talk about developing autonomous systems that would go patrol the region, um, a region that entails and includes, both as the previous national security strategy outlined, both a pacing threat and acute threat in China and in Russia, um, where we might have autonomous systems representing our national interests and our national values, but we need them to act in the same manner in which we would expect out of a airman, sailor, soldier, marine, or otherwise American up there, or American diplomat, perhaps. So, how do we ensure that those technologies, that in AI-enabled mentality, is embodied within the technology to go execute on our behalf? My assumption, again, now maybe to challenge myself, is that we can get uh, that we need. I guess we need to get that right. My assumption is we won't get it right the first time, on taking a shortcut to providing the domain awareness we need in this critical zone via autonomous systems with the right mindset, the right mentality. Uh, Hence, me going back to the data question. How do we put in the right data into these systems in order to be representative of what we want to achieve? That's that's where my thinking goes when prompted with that particular question, Janae.
Thank you. And I take your point, especially on domain awareness, which is incredible. We continue talking about that. It is a generational question that is perennial for us to struggle with up in this austere environment. I'd like to turn it over to John, if I could, if he has comments.
Yeah, thanks, Janae. I'm going to agree with both of my colleagues. It sounds like a easy way out, but I'll explain. Assumptions obviously are probably the hardest variable to control out of what we just talked about. My experience in the military is we put a lot of money into equipment. We put a lot of money into logistics. We can manage those things, and we've done very well in both the air environment and the space environment. But the assumptions is an education piece. And from a space perspective, um, I think that a lot of assumptions about Kodiak have been false rumors. And I'll give an example: weather. It's assumed that because we're in an Arctic environment up here, that we have limitations and restrictions on when we can launch rockets. And that's just not the case at Kodiak. Kodiak is an island. It's surrounded by water. It's very temperate, very little snow in general compared to the rest of the state. And if you compare the weather challenges in Kodiak to, say, Cape Canaveral or Vandenberg, they're one of their main issues for launch restrictions is lightning, and we don't have that in Kodiak. It occurs on a rare occurrence, and so we're year round, and we're able to launch in any season of the year. So I think that's just an assumption that becomes false when it's engaged. Logistics is another one. Up in Kodiak, we have airport, we have a deep water seaport, we have state roads that go out to the site. Are they perfect? No, but we have what's required to deliver to the site. Can it be improved on? Yes, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later. But that's another assumption that it's hard to get to. It's really not any harder than any other space uh, port where you're delivering rocket motors and fuel and liquid oxygen. There's still a road, there's still a barge, there's still an airport that's going to be required for those as well. So I think that is a big deal assumptions, but equipment breaks in the Arctic, and I've been on both the air side, the flying side, and the space side, and it's not just the cold temperatures that drive different procedures, but the salt water where we are is wreaking havoc on infrastructure and equipment like vehicles out of the site. So you've got to lean forward on that, and you got to stay ahead of it. But it's a known quantity that you can do, and I think the assumptions is the harder variable, and that breaks first.
Thank you. Oh man, I am humbled because you just broke one of my assumptions. One of my questions was going to be for you was how do you keep your aircraft mission capable in the extreme cold in Kodiak? And now I understand that's not a proper assumption. So I appreciate you educating me right there. I'm going to move over to Dr. Fogg and ask him the question, what does a day of Arctic operations actually consume and where does it come from?
So I'll talk about a traditional installation. Traditional installation has fixed infrastructure. We'll have a runway that's the right length. It'll have fuel storage. It's traditional hard fuel storage containers, and it'll be a military installation. Will have a munition storage area. So if we're looking at a traditional fighter intercept mission, we'll have all those things in place at an existing location like JBear or Howson. So we'll have that in place. But if we're going to some place that is more remote, and really because of the vast terrain that is Alaska and the Arctic, is that we need to go to places that are more remote and are more austere because it just gives us that advantage of time. And time is something we can't get back. And so if we can forward deploy locations, and when we forward deploy, we tend to forward deploy north. And so that forward deployment, it requires other types of infrastructure out there. So a typical day still requires the same fuel, the same munitions, but at those locations, the runway still has to be a certain length to meet the needs of the aircraft. And there may not be shelters for aircraft at those locations, as there were at the permanent installation. So we're going to need some sort of expeditionary storage capability for aircraft. The fuel requirement is we can't do like we do in a desert environment where we just take fuel bladders and lay them on the ground and think that's going to suffice. In the summertime, it may work. In the wintertime, it won't work because the fuel will gel up on us and it won't get the desired outcome. There are other storage containers that could be used. They're much more readily available in the commercial sector than they are in the Department of War, but there are other capabilities that we could employ. The same thing goes with shelters for personnel, and then also the munition storage area. The munition storage is not a small thing to overcome either, because the aircraft may have them, but we usually have to have some sort of separated location from an airfield that is currently in a multi-use status. So having that separation for military operations but having some dual use capability there. So if I were to make investments to get down to how do I operate through that multi-use installation or base that's used for commercial resources, it's increasing their fuel capacity, having a designated area that could be for temporary munition storage, and then ensuring that the airfield is large enough and they have enough ground capability to put in expedient shelters for those aircraft that would be in that expeditionary mindset. And so it's Arctic operations would revolve around that. And then the last and the most important component is the people. And so making sure that the personnel are trained and equipped and to operate in that climate. Because many times we talk about the person, we forget about that. I mean, we think that we're going to just, it's like come prepared kind of thing. It's like, we think we're going to take someone from South Florida and we're going to deploy them into the high north and all is going to be good. Well, that's not going to work out very well. And they just don't have the gear necessary sometimes. They don't have the training to understand. They don't understand that being outside and not having your gloves, you may not have fingers, in a few minutes. So there's things that have to happen. There's training that needs to occur to make them fully capable to operate in those severe spaces. And not Kodiak, but the high north. So and it does, and we look at that same type of requirement, and not only in Alaska, but looking across the Arctic and through Canada and also through Greenland. So that's my thoughts on that. Thanks, Janae.
Thanks, Jeff. And I would just add a bit of a humorous anecdote. When I first moved up here from the lower 48 and was on Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson for the first time, in terms of the people component that you were talking about and making sure that they're trained and equipped, it is the only time in my professional career, which no kidding, I had very serious training on what to do if a bear approaches me. Again, the training and equipment that you will probably never get in the lower 48, especially if you're somewhere in Florida coming up to Alaska, making sure we are ready for all things that could possibly happen up here. I appreciate that. I want to follow up with Matt on some of the commercial technologies that might actually help close some of these gaps. But Matt, if you'll hold for just 1 second, because I want to rest on this logistics question before I move over to some of the innovative approaches that you might be seeing in that gap space. And I'd like to follow up with both Mr. Oberst and Dr. Fogg, if I could, in terms of thinking through what it takes to keep the aircraft mission capable in this extreme cold. And understanding that process, and perhaps also to kind of expand that out a little bit for both of you. What does Alaska's existing infrastructure give us? And where are the biggest gaps that you see in that? So that's kind of a wide space to talk about. And then I'd like to move to Matt with regards to that gap and some of the things that he might be seeing that could fill that gap. So with that in mind, if I could move to you, John, in terms of the aircraft mission capable requirements in the extreme cold, and what do we have here with the existing infrastructure that Alaska gives us to help get after some of that? And then where the gaps are.
Yeah, Janae. So I'm reaching back on the military side a few years. But I mean, obviously, you need to be able to launch and recover aircraft in Alaska. And air defense, like Dr. Fogg had mentioned, requires multiple bases, multiple assets on alert, and recovery airstrips. So you have to be able to flex to different scenarios and have the infrastructure available and the logistics if you're going to use that infrastructure and it's austere to go recover those aircraft. We've done very well in Alaska with that model. We've reduced some of our peripheral bases like King Salmon for alert and still accomplished the mission. And it's been a few years, so I don't want to get too deep into that. I know that things change the procedures and policies are different now. But I appreciated at the time that we were very capable of operating in the North. Tankers up at Eielson in a very Arctic cold weather environment were the leaders in the country on how to operate in those types of environments. Everything was different. How you maintain the aircraft and how you operated in a minus 20, 30, 40 degree day was significant. People came to us to find our lessons learned to do that. But from a space perspective, historically, we've been 1 to 3 launches a year out in Kodiak, and we're looking at a uptick in ops tempo in an order of magnitude. So 4 to 12 minimum per year is what we're anticipating over the next several years of launch out of Kodiak. And that drives different logistics and energy requirements. So for us, we're looking at how do we bring more stuff out to the spaceport and not impact the local community significantly. And that means take stuff off the road, take rockets off the road, take fuel off the road, take liquid oxygen off the road. So we're working projects. One of them is a barge port near the spaceport that would remove that road segment and deliver those bulk items directly to the spaceport. And another one, it's more of a long pole, but a runway out at the site would serve many different agencies from a logistics perspective. It would support vertical launch by bringing in payloads and rockets and people and other timely and security required deliveries. But it's also an alternate for Kodiak in general. Their runway is down at sea level, and we are over 200 feet at the spaceport above sea level. We've had rockets on the stand within the last year where we had 2 tsunami warnings while it was on the stand. There were folks that moved in the community up to the higher level, which is us, just until the warning was over. So, logistically, airstrip and a port are significant to how we operate in the Arctic.
And would both of those, the port and the runway, would they both be 4 seasons operating all year round?
Yeah, they would,
Okay,
of course. Yep.
awesome. Thank
And
you.
then energy, we are engaged with the local community. We're engaged with the university on a study for energy throughout different areas in Alaska and the Department of War to bring more resilience out to the spaceport, redundant power lines, perhaps a power source where we're driving back towards Kodiak. We're at the end of the power grid there, and that would provide resiliency to the mission and also to the community. And I think from an energy perspective, a lot of our costs are in energy. There's no gas in Kodiak. We're driving significant bills with heat out there. And there's some other ways you can get synergies with heat, data centers being one of them. So if I remember the question correctly, I think we're looking at logistics and we're looking at energy.
Thank you. And your comment on redundancy equaling resiliency, I just can't help but think of the conversation that was had in Washington last week at our sister center, the Irregular Warfare Center's annual symposium, and the dual use purpose there, resiliency in the redundancy from a civilian perspective and a commercial perspective, but also from a military perspective, that redundancy in that context as well equals resiliency in this austere environment. So I appreciate your comments on that. I'm going to turn it over to see if Dr. Fogg would like to comment on the question about what Alaska's infrastructure currently gives us, where the gaps might be, as well as making sure that aircraft remain mission capable in the extreme cold, sir.
So for the Alaska gives us a great capacity there. I think there's things in Alaska that we take for granted, just as far as the open space and the ability to. It's like the range for on Kodiak. A great example of the azimuth and what you can do from that site that you can't do from other places. So Alaska has resources that we haven't really fully understood or explored. I'll agree with John there. The limitations are logistics and energy, and also and I think that's why the current administration with the Energy Dominance Council and energy dominance as a theme is kind of getting after that. It's because it's not just Alaska. The energy dominance theme runs across the lower 48 as well. So it's a broad area as a country, because we're looking at bringing on another 50 gigawatts of energy is what the requirement is for the country over the next 30 years or so. So enough energy that we're not prepared to go ahead and to go into the future well right now, where we need to really be driving development of new energy, not just sources, but actually generation and distribution. So it's enhancing that. Alaska could benefit also from that energy generation and distribution. It could benefit from the gas distribution across the broader part of the state. And that all goes down to, like I was saying before, the infrastructure, the logistics, and how those two marry together to make Alaska itself much more capable. Limitations for aircraft operations, though, on the high north side, what we see is that aircraft that operate out of Alaska, that are existing in Alaska, stay in Alaska, and operate from Alaska to in the vicinity, do very, very well. It's the challenge that we see is that when we forward deploy aircraft from the lower 48 into Alaska for that first time, there's a lot more preparation that has to go into that than there would be if those aircraft stayed in the lower 48. And that's things like different, and it's not just the aircraft themselves, but it's also all the aerospace ground equipment that supports them. So you have to basically winterize them for wintertime or extreme cold weather operations in the high north. And that's been a challenge that we've had some lessons learned there in the past, where, as an example, maybe the landing struts weren't pressurized to the right level, with the right materials, and you'll see landing gear collapse. So you have quirky little things that happen that require repairs and take things out of commission when you first deploy to location. So you do suffer a little bit there, and then you bring them back on board and you bring them back to speed. So there are challenges, not so much within operations in the area, but bringing additional resources into a space when you have those extreme cold environments. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to exhort our participants who are online. I know we have a little over 100 watching right now. I'm going to ask all of you to help us carry the message with regards to the importance of addressing the concepts of infrastructure and logistics. I know we have several who are online listening who are certifiable subject matter experts and could speak and probably give one of these podcasts themselves. But for those of you who are listening, please help us with the Ted Stevens Center mission to help educate, and the experts who have decided to join us today to help spread the word with regards to some of these, not only resources, but challenges that we face up here. We thank you for your tuning in and listening to us, and help us to continue to deliver that message to all who will listen. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hickey. Tell us, sir, what are some of the commercial technologies that you have observed in the DIU world that you live in that might be closest to solving some of these Arctic gaps that we're talking about? And if you could, is there an acquisitions bottleneck here that we're dealing with? What are some of the challenges to getting those solutions and those technologies rolled out to address these gaps?
Yeah, thanks, Janae. Well, let's tackle this by category, and maybe building on a little bit what John and Jet have just talked about. Let's start with energy. Energy is required for almost absolutely everything. Um, and the Arctic, as many folks know, is energy rich in oil and gas, and a plethora of renewables. Yet it's very challenging to get energy from its raw form, whether that's oil and gas or any sort of renewable sense, um, into a consumable form. And then when you're consuming it, it's very challenging to sustain it. So suddenly an energy problem becomes a sustainment problem, and it becomes a logistics problem. And the closer you can move an energy source to the point of consumption, the easier it is to close the gap, the logistics gap. And so one of the things that the Department of War has took upon its mantle has been trying to diversify, at least this is my opinion, trying to diversify the types of energy that can be utilized in a plethora of environments. How do you deploy the energy closer to the source of consumption? And how do you reduce the barrier of um, of of knowledge, of training required in order to use that energy? And so some of the companies that I've interfaced with have expeditionary power generation capabilities or expeditionary power storage capabilities. As many folks might know, generating power isn't all that difficult. Storing power is a harder challenge, especially if you take into account various sources of energy. And so, one of the things that the Department of War is looking at is how do we generate, say, or at least companies, industries are looking at it. Well, why can't we say deploy a solar powered apparatus to a location on site in an Arctic environments, use sort of a double interface where on the one side it receives direct rays from the sun, on the other side it reflects off of the snow, and then you still can absorb the sunlight, the solar, via reflection off of the snow. And then you use a certain material on the panels themselves where it'll self shed or melt the snow off of it, even when it's, sub-zero or well below zero. You put this in a location that a junior enlisted service member could deploy, and suddenly you have a deployable, usable, all season expeditionary energy source that doesn't require the heavy, logistically challenging, and oftentimes just logistically unreliable, not necessarily because of what it is, but how it gets there in diesel fuel. So that's one area. If we just look at energy generation or energy storage, let's talk about autonomous systems, and in particular UAS and counter UAS systems, and how they might apply to the Arctic. Let's take the Ukraine-Russia conflict as a baseline example. In that conflict alone, 10 million drones have been used in 4 years of war by each side. So that's 20 million drones, at least 20 million drones, the majority of which were one-way drones, the majority of which have been deployed in the last 2 years. The first 2 years of the war, the drone enterprise was still relatively nascent compared to what it is now. During the early years of the war, and even in the subsequent years, say years 3 and 4, American technology companies have tried to assist, or just technology companies in general have tried to assist in this autonomous effort by deploying their systems to the theater and said, hey, use this drone. Ukrainians had zero drone making capacity when this started, and now they lead the world in this capacity. And in the Western world, deployed technologies either in in hopes of the Ukrainians using them with success or to just get some data on it. And the Ukrainians quickly started sending them back, saying, not only do these not work, but they're getting our people killed. Please stop sending these systems. And it wasn't because they couldn't fly or deploy a lethal payload. It was because the software that was installed on the system couldn't tell the difference between one item and another in a snowbound, Arctic-bound, sort of vegetationless environment. The preponderance of drones had been tested in environments that were conducive to testing often, much like if you were to try to get your personal private license, you'd probably go to a place like Arizona because you could fly every day. So if you're going to have to fly something and test it, you want to go where you could test it often, not in bad weather, but in a place that you had reliable weather. So the software, the brain of these drone systems that were operating in a live operational environment were not smart enough to get the job done. And so I question whether the technologies that would be deployed to the Arctic are truly tested to operate in a snowbound, icebound environment that's very difficult to ascertain one thing from another if it hasn't gone through the requisite iterations from a software standpoint. And so one of the things that the on-ramp hub enterprise within DIU is trying to do is to facilitate access to locations in which companies can validate and verify their technologies before they're tested and then integrated into operational use. So at the very beginning, they can start testing against all-terrain environments, whether that's sea-bound, snow-bound, vegetation, green vegetation, dense vegetation, no vegetation. It needs to do everything. These are not only is autonomously flying, these are autonomously thinking. So they don't just fly on the road. They're not just remote, they are autonomous. And so I think in the Arctic, if we were to look at, say, even something that resembles a near-peer conflict between, say, a NATO nation, maybe the United States, maybe many of them, and Russia or China or both, and 10 million drones have been used by one side in, say, 2+ years of war, I can't imagine how many drones would be used in a conflict in the Indo-Pacific or the Arctic in a location that's very challenging. And so that's one area that I think that the Department of War is really looking into, is how do we make sure that not only can these drones operate, but how can they operate effectively in an environment that is as challenging as the Arctic? Those are some thoughts, Janae.
Thank you so much. And I can't help but think about the prior comment with regards to domain awareness and the use of drones, perhaps just below that level of open conflict too, and how that might develop in that domain as well. There's just so much to be said. We could just keep talking on this. In fact, I would like to, Dr. Fogg, turn it over to you, sir.
In what context? On the drones? On the drone context?
I'm sorry, sir. I thought you were trying to jump in on the conversation, but perhaps I misunderstood.
No, not at all.
You may try to say another thing.
Oh, it was Matt. I apologize. Back to you, Matt.
Well, let me just say this then. I think a uniqueness about the Arctic and Alaska is that it does have a lot of space. And for maybe some of the audience listening, depending on the capacities that they occupy professionally or maybe personally, and knowing how close knit and tight the communities are up there, that one of the unique assets, at least from the Department of War standpoint, in Alaska is the JPARC, the Joint Pacific Alaska Range Complex. The massive, the size and scale of that. Yet that doesn't encompass the entirety of the state. And I think if I were to hypothesize, maybe not make an assumption, but just present a hypothesis that as we progress in sort of this differentiation between a national security technology and a non-national security technology starts to kind of just not only get closer, but really sort of start to overlap, it's going to become incumbent upon us to recognize that technologies are going to need to be tested in locations that aren't necessarily a national security location. So whether that's Nome or Kodiak or other locations, I think we need to start expanding the way we think about trying to get technologies into the environments that would actually be used. And that's a challenge, because suddenly that's policy, that's governance, that's regulation overlapping with mission needs, mission requirements, national security objectives, and it becomes very complex. And that's where cooperation, collaboration becomes so key. Ensuring that we can get this done, which is actually the beauty and the beast of a democratic society. is that we can't force anything to happen, but if we can get it to happen, it means we're collaborating and cooperating, which is even better than forcibly requiring something. So so that's something I think that Alaska will take on in due time here.
I thank you for that. I have just a couple more questions, and I would like to give one question to all three of you to think about while I read a couple of the comments to make sure that everybody can see or at least hear what was written there, I should say. For all three panelists, please have a think on this one. What is one investment each of you would make tomorrow if you controlled the budget and the sky is the limit? While you're thinking on that, I would just like to read out one of the questions we received in the chat. Did we limit the discussion to only, oops, I have to scroll back up. Give me 1 second. Did we limit the discussion to only Greenland or only to Alaska? Perhaps you can speak to areas outside of Alaska like Canada or Greenland. And I would like to read Dr. Fogg's response. The challenges in Alaska are also in Greenland and Canada, limited access and very challenging climate. In some ways, Alaska is an easier operational environment than the high north locations of Canada. Infrastructure and logistics development in all three areas would be very beneficial to access key resources. And I appreciate too Jake Parker's comment about the opportunity that he was just given to stand up the Army Arctic Division Sustainment Support Battalion. Lots of trucks, very few roads, looking at how our Arctic partners and adversaries maneuver in this domain, drones, snow, ice-capable vehicles, etc. And thanks to Dr. Fogg for his response to start thinking about snow machines would be a great idea and where he could get connected and plugged in on that. So I appreciate the folks in the chat. This is generating great discussion. I'm going to turn back now to my three panelists. I'll go from Jeff to John to Matt. If you had the opportunity to control the budget, what is one investment you would make tomorrow? Jeff, over to you.
So my investment would be how we manage the budget and how do we switch from this this bureaucratic monster of what it is to actually put the resources in the hands of the folks who are in the field and really follow the Ukraine model for how we do capability development. And that the Ukraine model is that cycle things very rapidly because we have, and Matt alluded to this, is that of the drone technology as an aspect, as an example, is that technology rapidly evolves on a day-to-day basis. So in several weeks, things are stale. They're no longer effective in those battle spaces. So we need to really revise that entire how we appropriate funds, how we consume funds, and basically put the warfighters directly with the developers. They work together, so you can't tell who's who, and they can operate and they can evolve much more rapidly in these really rapidly changing environments. And the same thing would apply to the high north. Over.
Man, I wish we had a screen for the 100 folks who are listening in, because I wonder how many people would be applauding right now about your comment with regards to the management of the budget being the thing that you would change to get things out into the arms of the warfighters sooner than later, especially with, as you noted, how quickly things turn stale. And as I see all the claps that are coming in from our audience, I can tell that you have a couple of strong supporters out there, sir. I'm going to turn it over now to John, if I could, for your comments on the question.
Thanks, Janae. Dual use. I would focus on dual use. This is a warfighting question, but it's also something that needs to be maintained, invested in over time. Dual use brings in the ability to keep a well-oiled machine and also to bring in private investment. So I would focus on dual use, high-ticket items that you just can't go out and build with profits for a smaller or medium-sized company. And then when it comes to dual use, I would focus on logistics for that. And I think that's really the crux of where I was going with your question.
Thank you. I appreciate that, sir. Dual use, well noted. Mr. Hickey, over to you.
Yeah, I'll answer in two ways. One is very tangibly. I'd allocate a large sum of money to establish an artificial intelligence command that would oversee the implementation of this across the sort of like a functional command across the entirety architecture of our national security initiatives. So I applaud the department for announcing the establishment, or at least the intent established, autonomous. I think it's autonomy and robotics command. or something of that nature. I think personnel is policy. So if you can establish people within the institution to focus on a particular thing with a defined budget, you can truly implement it. So that would be one. If I was more on if I approach this differently, I think I would remove the entirety, just get rid of the concept of a defense budget, and stop promoting the figure of X amount of money being allocated to the Department of Defense or the Department of War, because I think that removes as sort of John's alluding to, and Jeff a little bit on the dual use. It's not even dual use; it's multi-use. It's everything use these days. We can invest and allocate money to the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education or any other executive agency or branch of government and have national security purposes behind it. And conversely, we can make investments to the Department of Defense that don't really have anything to do with defense or anything like that, because they might just be simply being allocated towards the education system within the Department of Defense at the various schools in which the DoD runs. They're all relevant to national security in their own way. So I think we should maybe find a way to categorize these initiatives in terms of investments, or at least government investment to national security, and then therefore to be a national security budget as opposed to defense. And I do think the difference matters. I don't think it's semantics. The difference between national security and a non-national security item, it doesn't exist anymore. We can look at the fact that the NORTHCOM commander has flat out stated that we might not be under attack in the traditional or conventional sense, but every second of nearly every day we are under attack in the cyber domain. How do we rectify that? There are many agencies and many entities outside the Defense Department, CISA included, within the DHS, that are relevant to our defense, the defense of the nation, that aren't necessarily within the Defense Department. Yet we keep looking at things through how much money we allocate to the DoD year in and year out, which sometimes creates an argument that we shouldn't be having. So that might be one way that I look at it differently. But certainly more investment into incorporating the future and the current, bringing AI into the way in which we think at every level. So just some thoughts, Janae. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you all very much, esteemed chairs. And obviously, so much could be said about this budget and how it needs to be reformed, improved to address what it actually takes to fuel, fly, and fight in the Arctic. I definitely have more questions that I would love to talk through with you, and perhaps we can find another time. But our time, unfortunately, this morning has ended, and I want to thank our audience who joined us. If you are interested in following these kinds of threads and conversations, in addition to our online events with our esteemed Arctic chairs, several of you are tracking that from 27 to 29 October, we will be hosting the Anchorage Security and Defense Dialogue here in Anchorage. And we would love to have you be there. If you would like to join us, you can reach out on our website. You can find our our email address, TSC Engagements, to talk more about that with us. We know our chairs are strong supporters of that as well. And we are grateful, gentlemen, for your time talking through this piece of the discussion this morning. We look forward to continuing the conversation in other fora. Thank you for your continued support of the Ted Stevens Center and helping us get the message out as we continue to talk about that fascinating and multifaceted space that is our Arctic. With that, this is Janae Cooley, the Associate Director for Strategic Engagement, saying thanks so much, and we hope you all have a great day. Chairs, thank you for your time.